When I first got started with getting things done, I tried a number of varieties of contexts, and this was before I got into OmniFocus, but it was rather complicated the way I tried it. But I was working in a scenario, I was in a corporate environment, and I was working as a data analyst, and I was working in and out of a variety of programs that I felt like that's where the bulk of my work was at. And I thought I had this brilliant idea whenever I had first finished getting things done to set up contexts that were based around the applications that I was working with. So it looked similar to this, where I had the exact programs that I was working with quite a bit. So I had SQL Server up, I had Excel, Word, and Outlook. They were all open constantly. I always had a lot of notes on Word. I was always in spreadsheets and SQL Server, had tons of data tables that I was working with. And of course, email in a corporate environment means that you're pretty much in it all day long. Obviously, this did not work well. I do not recommend that you do this. It's too easy to switch from program to program, especially for me on a Mac. I am back and forth on programs mere seconds apart from each other. So it just doesn't work to batch applications, batch tasks by application. So I would recommend you stay away from that. The second one I have here are energy levels, and this is a series of contexts I pulled from Sven Feshner's article about a fresh take on context, and this was a very popular article for him. I'm sure it still is, and a lot of people have adopted these energy levels, and it's for good reason. It seems like in the world today, given that our tools make it possible to work on contexts in any scenario, because I can do a lot of the work from my phone that I can do from my MacBook Pro, and vice versa. There's a lot of overlap there. Well, because of that, we tend to operate off of energy levels instead. That means that sometimes I have a short amount of time and I just don't have a lot of energy. Well, I'll work on short dashes, or I can't even think straight. What should I do when I'm brain dead? Well, take out the trash. Like, there are simple things along those lines. Or if I first get to work and I have a lot of energy and I feel like I can take on a big report, I'll work on full focus. Sometimes I have distractions I want to work on just because I think they're interesting. There's some videos I want to watch. There's something I want to learn. I'm just hanging around. That's what I'll work on. My major problem with energy levels is that I can't tell the difference whenever I've shifted from one to the other. This goes back to the reactive versus proactive side of things, because in theory, you can react to the energy levels that you have, but a lot of studies have shown that you can manufacture energy at different times. If you're able to take a break, you take a 5-minute break, you do something, you can increase your energy level very quickly. You build in rituals and you can start to manufacture energy as you need it. The more that I realize that, the more that I know sometimes I feel brain dead, but I have a task on full focus that I need to do. And that means that I need to do something in order to take a break, do a quick ritual so that I can come back and work on that full focus task. It's possible for me to put myself in those scenarios. So for me, energy levels don't matter because I can either put myself in them, or if I'm going to try to react to them, I just can't tell the difference whenever I've moved from one to the next. So for me, it's better off to avoid those. Now, one that did work for me for a little while was time periods. And I kept this one for a decent amount of time because I knew there were certain things I would do in the morning before I went to work. There were some things I would do late morning while I was at work and afternoon while I was there. And then after I was home, and then in the evening after the girls had gone to bed. And that does work if you're willing to think about the types of tasks that are best suited for each time of day. Now, what I found was with that scenario, it does work if you have the exact same routine every day of the week and your weeks never change. For me, I occasionally do travel. Whenever I was trying this, I was still in a corporate scenario, and that didn't work because I was traveling probably once or twice every couple of weeks. It just kind of depended. So it got messy real quick, and I was finding myself grouping them all together and running through every task available to me in order to figure out what I could do. So it just didn't work out for me. Now, one that I have a decent amount of carryover from are tools. And when I first started using tools, it was very helpful to me to think about, okay, well, now I have my MacBook Pro. What all can I do while I'm here? I was on an airplane. I'm in offline mode, I can look through my MacBook list and kind of pick out the ones that I can work on. Same thing for the wood shop. I had a list of projects I was doing for some DIY stuff, so it worked out well for me to have that as well. And I do have a lot of carryover from that today. However, I have a very different reasoning for that. Whenever I built this, my intent was to react to the tools that I had in front of me. Again, I'm going back to this reactive, proactive mindset. Whereas now, instead of just working on the other tasks that are applying to the same context I'm currently in, I will choose the context that's best suited for that task, and I will put myself in that context specifically for a set amount of time, or I will choose to continue working on it, and it makes it easy for me to choose, okay, I'm going to spend 2 hours on my MacBook. These are the things I can do while I'm there. And I know that I don't want to spend more than that because I will start to get out of focus. I know I'll get distracted after that amount of time. So it's easy for me to use that context as something to ground me to say, this is what I'm going to work on right now. Another one that did work for a little while was locations for me. And I know that some people use this one heavily. They'll tend to use work and home, and then that's it. That works for some people. I tried that, the office, home, traveling, airplane. I tried some of those, and I don't use them nearly as often as I used to. Occasionally I'll bring one in temporarily, but they're too long for me. I have too many projects going on, and it means that it gets consolidated too far. So for some people, if you only have 10 or 15 projects going on, I could easily see how this is helpful. It would work really well to know that I'm going to go to the office and work on something. This is the list of things that I do when I'm in the office or if I'm at home. It's, again, tricky if you work from home, but it can work if you're able to create those delineations. Now, another one that works really well for some, and I have a lot of carryover from this, different mindsets and different activities can have a lot of energy levels. They can have time involved. They can have tools involved. They can have a lot of these things that are lumped together to create an activity that you're going to work on. So a lot of creatives will have something like write or record video or edit. You know, a lot of people deal with email and phone calls. They want to group all those together so you have communicate. For me, I'm a web developer primarily, so I will have develop where I'm writing code. And these can work extremely well. And I used to try to run everything off of these, but it didn't allow me to do some things like my DIY projects. And there's just not everything can be included in those. But this does seem to work pretty well because you're going to put yourself in the scenario where you're going to work on this activity. Maybe it's a time of day, maybe it's a tool. There are a lot of ways that can come at this, but you're going to put yourself in the scenario where you're going to work on that. And that to me seems to work extremely well. So going off of that, this is my full-on setup here. And if we look at each one of these, you'll see somewhat of a combination of the ones that we've gone through as well as some of the meta tasks and the placeholder context that we were talking about in another video. So the first one of these I have is Horizons. It's purely a collection of the specific projects that apply to my higher level missions and goals. I just like to have those separated off, and this also allows me to group them towards the top, which again, I have these all in a specific order. If I go on down the line, I have a ton of things I read. For the podcast I run with Mike Schmitz, Bookworm, we read a lot, so it's helpful to me to have a context for that scenario. I read every morning, and it's helpful for me to have a list of things that I can read whenever I put myself in the time and the mindset to sit down and read. Learn is kind of a carryover from a context that I developed at one point called distractions, because I would collect things that I wanted to learn about or I wanted to go watch a video. There, something that I was going to pick up, a new skill I was going to learn. And I was originally collecting those under a distractions context, and then whenever I had 10, 15 minutes that I didn't know what to do with, I would pull that up to go learn something. Well, I've simply renamed it because I don't feel so good about going to a context called distractions, but I prefer one called learn, and it's helpful for me to say, okay, I'm going to go do some research right now. I'm going to go learn about something. This is what I'm going to do. Analog is one that I picked up because so much of my writing anymore is done on paper or some brainstorming I'm going to do on a whiteboard. I will specifically put myself in a scenario where I'm going to do that. Or if I'm on an airplane, I know that I can always go to that one because I've always got pen and paper with me. I always know that I can work on that at that time. As I mentioned, the next two, communicate and develop. It's those activities that I'm going to work on. So communicate, that can be phone calls, emails, social media, discussion topics that I'm going to post in forums online. Anything that involves me posting something for someone else to consume, that's where it goes. So it's helpful for me because I have a specific time in the day that I like to sit down, go through email, and do that type of thing. So I like to group them because I'm going to go into that scenario, so it's easy for me to batch them at that time. Same thing with develop. I tend to treat long hours in the morning towards either writing, recording, or coding, and whenever I decide to go do some coding, it makes it really easy to just pull up the batch of things I need to do to write code. Now, there are also times when I'm not doing code, I'm not doing the communication piece, any of those types of things that I will also sometimes do design work. I'm writing proposals, I'm writing quotes for people. Any of those types of instances, it requires me to use my MacBook Pro, but they don't really apply to any of the other areas. So whenever I have time and I'm going to work on my MacBook Pro, I like to, again, batch those at that time. And the same thing goes for my iPhone. Some tasks are best suited for the phone. If I'm going to create a new template for OmniFocus or I'm going to, make a phone call, sometimes I'll put it there instead of under communicate. It just kind of depends. But the intent is that if I'm, say, standing in line and I'm waiting somewhere, it's easy for me to pull that up. That might be the one scenario where there's a bit of a reactive sense where I have time that I didn't know I was going to have, and all I have with me is my phone. That's probably the one scenario where I've got a reactive style context. After hours is easy for me. It's whenever I decide to get off work and on the weekends. And it's primarily a time-based decision around what it is I can do at that time. It's fully chalked with DIY project tasks. So that's where those go. You'll also see agendas and waiting. That's the traditional sense in the GTD world where there are people I need to talk to. There are things I'm waiting on other people to do. I like to keep those two separate, and I don't nest context underneath of them because I simply name those tasks with the person's name at the beginning, or I say I'm waiting for Matt to do this. And that's simply how I do it. I just use the person's name, and then it's a simple search for the specific person that I'm looking for in order to get both agendas and waiting pulled together to figure out what I need from that person. For errands, I used to recommend that you do a lot of the location-aware contexts on the iPhone, and I'll do a little bit of a explanation on how that works for the context whenever we do an iOS section video, but I don't use those anymore because I found that, one, they did work for me. A lot of people have issues for how they would operate. They worked really well for me, but I never had that many items on those lists. And I was like, why am I doing this? So I've just gotten into the habit where if I need to go get something specific, I had added something to a list that I need to get immediately, I'll pull that errands list up and just look through the items that are on it because there's never more than 4 or 5 and just see, okay, can I get any of these while I'm out? And then like we talked about in the types of context video, I have checklists and running at the bottom. And I like to just keep those there because it keeps the checklists items off of my active working list, and it allows me to keep my someday maybes off of my active working list as well. So those are purely placeholders just to pull things out of my available working tasks lists. So that's my full-on setup. And it's kind of a conglomeration of all of the different types that I've worked with in the past. But ultimately for me, these are scenarios when I'm going to be putting myself into the specific mindset, location, and set of tools in order to work on those specific items. You can pull from this. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is that you need to do. I simply know that everybody has their own way of working with these. My recommendation is to pick up 2 or 3 of these that you think are helpful and then add to them as you need, but try not to add many. Stick to as few as you can get away with and don't overdo it and don't overcomplicate the context that you're going to work from.